Welcome to the Church of Thomas. These are readings from Awakenings in an Age of Angels. This chapter is called Rabid Dog. There was a village that was surrounded by farmland. It was a sticky, hot, late August. The harvest was coming. Everyone was gearing up for the final push. Every able hand and back would be needed to avoid the disaster and starvation that could visit an unlucky year. What affected the farmers sent bounty and shock waves into the village. A lack of tools or supplies would mean hardship, because it meant not getting in the bounty. It was a week or two before the projected start of the harvest. A really big dog wandered into the village. It was short-haired and muscular. The dark brown of its fur was almost the same shade as the mud that was caked on its legs and belly. It seemed healthy, if a little skinny. It was friendly, and even with its size, it did not seem intimidating. The dog set up outside the general store as though it had been its puppyhood home. Farmers and villagers alike dropped bits of their lunches for it to eat. A few even stroked its head or back. Its tail would thump loudly on the walkway in rhythm to the petting. No one knew where it came from or why they had not seen it before. It was hard to return a dog home when no one knew where it was. No one questioned the pink scar on its face. Dogs were always getting into scrapes with other dogs and wild things. The scar did not look angry or inflamed, just very new. The flow of people in and out of town picked up with migrant workers coming and going. They went to small spreads and back to the village to scout another job. Farmers were coming and going to hire workers, buying food to feed them, to repair tools, and to buy new ones. The merchants sorted last-minute shipments of sharpening stones, sickles, extra bags, baskets, and boxes. These were the supplies that would make the harvest to market and the shipments out of town possible. No one noticed that the dog quit eating the scraps. No one noticed when it stopped drinking too. It had moved into the open doorway of the general store. It now occasionally emitted a low growl. People just thought it was having a bad day. Maybe its tail had been stepped on one too many times. At closing, the shopkeeper eased the door shut. There was barely room to do it with the dog almost in the way. He did not pet the dog since he had heard that it had been in a surly mood that day. The dog lay there impassive. It lay as far from the light of the setting sun as it could. It cringed as if daggers pierced its eyes when the last rays of sun finally could not be avoided. This was happening at supper time, so no one saw its agony. As the shopkeeper fell asleep, he dreamed of profitable returns on his investments that were starting to reach a crescendo. As the farmers slumbered, they dreamed of work tallies and trying to remember if there was an item still not purchased. They dreamed of the pattern of the harvest and how to get the most work out of the migrants. They dreamed of the security against strangers who might hijack their shipments on the way to the big market. Workers dreamed of families they were separated from and the possible permanent positions if they worked really hard. They calculated how much they could afford to send home and still not go hungry. There were the ones who did not respect their wives or driven by loneliness, and the singles. They dreamed of the women who might help them spend their pay. It was to be the last peaceful sleep for all of them. In the morning, they would be confronted by what they would consider pure evil. The dog had metamorphosized into a totally different animal. It seemed possessed. It had completed its path to madness in the early hours before the sun came up. It ran after people who were trying to get out of their front doors. It chased carts that would not stop because of the dog's assault. The cart drivers did not slow their retreat until they were well out of town. They were heavy laden and were unable to unload. Some of the farmers trying to find the last work crews or supplies. Everyone in town was terrorized. No one went outside the safety of their homes. Nothing got done that day. After a few days of sneaking around town, a couple of young toughs decided to drive the dog out of the village. They rushed the dog, only to be rushed by the dog in turn. The dog had smelled the fear of their acrid sweat. The dog recognized their loss of courage. The merchants did not want to be ruined, so they tried to placate the dog. They offered food and water, which of course were rejected. This group was also vanquished by the fierceness of the dog. The farmers got into the act. They tried to capture the dog. Maybe it sensed their intention or out of pure randomness refused to be caught. Fear of contamination was a huge concern. They had seen wild animals act tame only to have the tame animals go berserk. It was contagious and you could go berserk if you touched one of these animals. Their fear spoiled their chances to catch the dog. The workers were very worried. They did not have homes or stores or families to take them in. They were trapped, unable to leave town. Without their jobs in nearby communities, this situation would create a grave problem for their winter survivals, not to mention no money to send home. As a result, whole families might starve, even though they were hundreds of miles away from this mess. One of the workers was a healer by profession. She was very insightful. She also had a great love of all life. She got a long pitchfork out of an abandoned wagon. She broke off all the tines, all but one in the middle. This one was the dead center and in line with the handle. She made a shield by wrapping leather over her arms and hands, but her greatest weapon was her compassion. She had compassion for the workers, the farmers, and for the village. The biggest share of her compassion was for the rabid dog. It was sick. All efforts to neutralize its threat had been in vain. Because she was a healer, this might be necessary, but it was still hard to think about taking a life, especially since she was a healer. The village tried to run it off, placate it, appease it, and last but not least, try to trap it. She did not want to be contaminated, so she took precautions. The dog was growing weaker, but it was still a massive threat. It could barely swallow, but though it was frustrated by its inability, it still craved water. The dog almost did not see her approach. There was no smell of fear. She walked slowly and calmly. Nothing she did jarred or stimulated the dog. She might as well have been a bit of brush riding on the wind. Before she was in position, the dog gamely rose to snarl at this new attacker. It drooled uncontrollably. It lunged. As she charged, she twisted to the side. She plunged the tine into its side. She had to dance out of the way. She wanted to stay out of the way of any of the spittle that might be flung from the massive drooling head. When it went down, she pulled the tine free of the dog's fighting body. She quickly plunged the tine a second time into a killing spot. As the dog lay dying, she sent love and compassion to ease its passage. This is how evil must be approached. Without fear, which only gives it strength, it must be approached without bloodlust or hatred. Having compassion is the ability to look at the ugliness and find the trapped beauty. Trying to recognize evil is an illness. To be able to pity the poor animal possessed by it. Having pity does not mean you have to be contaminated by evil. Just know that for the greater good it must be put out of its misery.